core group expressed a pretty strong desire in their belief in themselves. What's going to take for this group to take the next step?
I think the last step was critical. Taking all of the steps, and then we'll talk about that next step in a minute. We've got a good, strong coming of age core. There's still some work to do for sure. Ken, I think this is the first group of guys that we've had that were kind of completely committed to Winnipeg, to the Jets. That's like an important step. We had really young team, kind of young players are trying to find, where they fit in the NHL, where are they being maximized. They ask themselves those questions, and then they hit an age, and I felt they hit that this year where they started asking, what can I do to help us win? So that's the first step. And then the next step is interesting, because the next step gets you into the middle part of the playoffs, right? You get to the 8. And that's where we are now with the group that we had in the situation that we faced. That's where we got to, and a lot of really good things had to happen for us to get there. The next stage is, I guess, feeling like you would be if you were Colorado, or you're one of those teams that the media picks. And the general idea is, okay, these guys are in their prime now. I don't think we were quite there this year. I don't think that was the sense going in, but you're going to get a little stronger in all areas. You'll get a little more mature in all areas. And then you start, I guess, being thought of as one of those teams. I think we are pretty darn close to that. I think getting into the middle of the pack in the playoffs, and then you get that whole anything that can happen idea. But you also see how incredibly challenging it is with the teams that got beat this round. It's a grinder. It's tough, but I think we're moving to that. Maybe closer to it now than we have been at any time.
I'll go back to Ken Weeb for a follow-up. Go ahead, Weber.
Paul, you used the golf analogy a couple of years ago about not needing to change your grip. Do you still feel that way, or are there some swing changes in the offing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there has to be adjustments in the way we view the game, but that changes with your group. I'm not sitting here saying that, where we finished, we were the number one contender and we were right there. I don't think that. I think in some ways we overachieved in certain areas of our game. So I don't know about changing your grip, but we have to keep forward motion, right? I thought we kind of, I don't even say lost traction last year, but with all the changes that we faced last year, we kind of maybe moved sideways. And then I thought we got back to forward motion again this year.
We'll go next to Mike McIntyre from the Winnipeg Free Press. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Gregor. Morning, Paul. No question, you guys have a Vezina Trophy winner in net. And I wonder just your thoughts on, does having a Connor Hellebuyck at times maybe mask some issues with the team, just because he alone can give you a shot that maybe other teams don't have the same luxury? And is that something that you guys are maybe aware of, and you have to try and build a little better around him?
Well, we do, right? We've got like a world-class goaltender in net, and that's a big part of having him. I think that's the kind of goaltending that you're seeing right now. Some big number nights, some big saves from that guy. So the idea, I think, is I don't think you're going to find a lot of teams out there without that are still playing. That's a standard. And then you're right. We need to build in front of that to give them a chance. But I really feel we're at that. I mean, I think we've got some room to get better. I think some of our younger skilled forwards, a guy like Nicky Ehlers, his plus minus, like what he's willing to do to defend, not just be here to score goals. That's all part of it. But we have a great goaltender. I don't think we ever leave the bench going, we don't need Connor Hellebuyck to win. That's part of it, right? There's an investment in a player. Like all young players, he went through those 2 years where he got pulled a bunch of times and his numbers weren't very good. That's the investment you make, and the payoff is we're going to have this guy. I think it is prime for probably another 5 to 7 years. That's a big piece to the team. But I don't think we sit here and say, hey, we can cheat the game because we've got a great goalie. I just think there's great goaltending left.
We'll go back to Mike McIntyre for a follow-up. Go ahead, Mike.
And then you mentioned young players, Paul, just on that topic. I mean, Is it something, I'm sure you do this every off season, where you sit down with Kevin and you go over kind of the immediate and longer term vision for the team, but do you feel that the two of you are still very much in sync with, I guess, the prospects and the usage of young players and how they can maybe help the Jets take that next step?
Yeah, I think we have been right from the get-go. Like, I'll take you back to that first conversation when I came in. He said, we're going to take a look at the veterans that we have, and then we're going to strip this thing right down and we're going to play the kids. And that's exactly what happened when you look at the ice time. Like, we went 3 or 4 years, God, being about 24, 28 years old, right in the bottom 2 or 3 teams in the league terms of age. We just played the kids and played the kids. And in some ways that keeps happening, right? So it's just a little bit of a different curve. You get your Logan Stanleys now kind of coming in and getting that next opportunity, and Vesseline and another first round pick. That's just his kind of introduction back into the NHL. So when there's good young players that can come in and help, then we want to have them in our lineup. In terms of playing kids 2 or 3 years till they get ready, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. We need to have those guys playing in the American League and keep going. So I don't think we're late on anybody here. I really don't think we've ever slow played a young player. Logan needed all that time and then some time in the NHL. Now I think we got a really unusual player, man, that big, that can handle the puck a little bit. So I think we're on the same page with it for sure.
We'll go next to Jason Bell from the Free Press. Go ahead, Jason.
Thanks, Gregor. Good morning, Paul. You'll have exit interviews with all your guys. You probably already have. They probably already scattered. What about your exit interview, Paul, with Kevin? You'll have a performance review, I assume. I mean, what are the things that you'll tell him, or are you even at a point where you need to do that at this point? Some people would argue that maybe 7 years there might be a shelf life for a coach. How do you feel about that?
I'll answer the first part of your question. So that exit interview or conversation with Kevin is a daily, right? And it's going to happen 5 or 6 times in the next 2 weeks about where we were at, what he saw, what I saw, where we've got to get better, and where we are going in the future. But this would not be. This is a daily conversation that's happened every day since I've been here. I mean, we talk about where we're at, where we need to go, and discuss how we got to get there. As far as the shelf life, I would just, and I understand in my job, you're always going to have your critics, and that's a beautiful part of pro sports. It's the passion of the game. But I'm really proud of the job I did and this staff did this year under incredibly trying circumstances. I'm really proud of it. We did a good job this year. Our team played hard, fought through adversity. But a bigger thing that maybe I can't sell, but I'll explain to you, that's really important. The room right now, the culture in our room right now is as good as it's been since I've been here. And I think that's priority one for your job as a coach. I think we have more players invested in Winnipeg now than we ever had. Truly, the Jets, the community, the long-termedness, and this sometimes, fellas, is a challenge, right? We always have guys that love playing in Winnipeg, love playing for the Jets. It's small things. Mark Scheifele buying a house. It's all of those kind of connections that we need to have in Winnipeg, because maybe we're not like some other major markets that can draw players or not have us on their no trade list. All those things that we compete with. So our draw has to be our room and the culture of our room and the togetherness of these guys. And that, I say without qualification, this is as close a group as we've ever had. And the culture of our room right now is as strong as it's ever been. And the coaches are, in fact, a part of that.
We'll go next to Kelly Moore from 680 CGOB. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you, Gregor. Good morning, Paul. As we've seen, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of years to develop and build a core. But while you're doing that, the game is also evolving. So when you look at your core and where the game is right now, what it takes to win and get to that Final Four, as we've seen with the teams there, are you comfortable that it's the right core and that the team is positioned to be able to one day get to where the Vegas Golden Knights and the Tampa Bay Lightning are, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think the core is very close to being right. And some of that is just continuing to develop that core. The pieces around the core are probably the place that we'll try to do the most work on it, but we're strong at center. We're strong in goal. We've got some shooters on the wings that can do some things. We've got a bit of bite in our lineup, not a tremendous amount, but some. So I think the core is right. It's very, very hard to get a core that you like. And, Kelly, I look at the other 8 teams, and they're probably all going to say the exact same thing. The core is right. And your core has to be right to even get to that point. And there's going to be 6, maybe 5 or 6 of the 8 that didn't get through the first round that are saying their core is right. It's a hard thing to get a group of guys like we've got together. You pay years of a price to get to that point, but it's there. It's there, and I think it'll keep getting better. And we're gonna, like all of these teams, Colorado, you think mostly that's right there on the doorstep. They're gonna look around at kind of that periphery support around their core to get them over the hump.
We'll go back to Kelly Moore for a follow-up. Go ahead, Kelly.
So, Paul, if memory serves correct, some of the supporting moves you made were specific to this year and the situation we're going to be in. Will you view that differently now that you're going back to the Central Division? Will that look a little bit different in terms of that supporting cast?
Yeah, I don't know how much that part changes. The first question always will be, what do we have available to us right now that can come in and contribute, not just hold water? What do we have in terms of young players that we can get to contribute? And then what are our needs and the holes that we need to fill, or the areas that we can upgrade? And then that part's actually easy, Kelly. You can sort that out very quickly. The question is, what can you do to acquire that? And what is the cost of acquiring? That's the far bigger challenge. How do you make those areas where you got to get better? How do you make those better? So that's the bigger challenge.
We'll go next to Sarah Lesky from TSN. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thanks, Gregor. Hi, Paul. Just wondering, obviously you had the exit interviews this week as well, but what has this week been like for you? How much time have you spent looking back on that series against Montreal? Are you the type that thinks, if I had done this, do you play out different scenarios in your mind, or do you close the book on it pretty quickly?
I usually take 3 or 4 days and you don't have a control of your brain, so you're going back for it, but try not to go too deep into it, and then you'll go back and you'll go straight through it, right? Get back and you'll watch those games and you'll go through every step of areas. And normally I don't think about it, but my phone was ringing real early this morning from Pete DeBoer, who's playing Montreal, and we spent a couple hours talking about what his team has just done and what he's going to face with Montreal. So I think more importantly, I'll go back and start from the very beginning, from the first meeting at training camp to all of it straight through. And as I've actually done that a bit over the last couple of days, I'm just reminded about how incredibly extreme it all was, right? You start looking at your schedule, and first team in 40 years that ran that road schedule and did pretty well with it. You've got your 7-game stretch where you lose, how you came out of that. The Edmonton series feeling so strong and excited about it. You've got the night after the first game against Montreal going, ooh, hoping that Mark's back in your lineup sooner rather than later, trying to deal with that, hoping that Stas can come back in, how you're going to deal with DeMello's injury. So you start wobbling, and then you're always left with an incredible disappointment, just an incredibly sense of I don't even know how to describe it to you. When you put all of your time, your entire life into one thing, and it just disappears on a final buzzer. So you learn to take a few days before you really rehash it. But we'll go through that series very closely.
Go back to Sarah Lesky from TSN. Go ahead, Sarah.
And sticking with that idea of going back and reevaluating everything, you made a comment in one of your earlier comments today about how perhaps there were some areas in which your group overachieved this season. Can you give us an idea on where you think that may have been?
I think being able to shut the 1-2 down guys in the National Hockey League is pretty darn impressive. And you've got a scratch and claw decor, right? So what we weren't running a bunch of Norris guys against them. We were a bunch of guys that had to work and give everything on every shift. The idea of covering ice easily against Connor McDavid has never happened. The cost of that to them mentally, that they were able to play to their prime plus in that series. I think that back end, I guess I said overachieved, but I don't really like that a word because humans are capable of an awful lot. I think they reached their capacity of capability in that series, and it was awesome to watch. And then, of course, you're left in the next series, and we struggled. So, but I do think in that series, when you can do what those guys did, and yes, back to an earlier question, Connor Hellebuck is a huge part of that, Mike. I mean, that's a big part of all of it. But I really enjoyed just watching from the bench how that bench matured and cheered guys on and just supported and covered over when there was a mistake. That was a fun series from a coach's point of view. And I think that's where I got to this culture idea. And that also went into my exit meetings. That was the thing that I was left with when the players left, is these guys are all in here. And it was almost the first time I left my exit meetings where I didn't have 6 guys going, well, what about me? How come I didn't, I want to play more. What can I get? Where the meetings were the opposite, is, they love playing here. Great bunch of guys, love the room, love the game, love the year. One of my most fun years, all of those kind of things. Felt like I played my best hockey. I feel like I'm developing into my best player self. So in that part, I think we hit it out of the park.
We'll go next to Scott Billick from the Winnipeg Sun. Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Gregor, and hey, Paul. What is the identity of your team, or what do you want it to be, and what do you need to get to what that is?
Think you could ask me a bigger question, possibly? It's a joke, man. Relax. Hang on. Let me get War and Peace out. You start there. I'll start my answer, and I bet you finish first. So what I want on any team that I've had is I want them to play like a team. So you asked me a very general question, so I understand that sounds like a cliche, but I want that bench to be together. I want them to fight together. I want them to adhere to a certain style of game that they will all understandably look slightly different in their skill set. But I want that compete, and I want that room, number one, to fight for each other. That's the culture part of it. So would like to play a very fast game if possible, and a very physical game. Those are the two pieces. You look at the playoff hockey, and you look at the difference between regular season hockey and playoff hockey, and you look at really a version of what the Islanders has done, but that's extreme too, because the Islanders' goaltending numbers, like in that series, they stopped an awful lot of pucks, right? With the exception of the last game, in which, I don't know if you guys saw that national anthem, but that was awesome. Like that was possibly the greatest thing that we missed, was that kind of emotion at home. So you've got an older, heavy, hard team. That's playoff hockey. You've got Tampa coming in, and they are really fast, but they're also quite physical with their game. And you've got the Vegas Golden Knights are a big, heavy, fast, physical team. And Montreal, I think, would be a prime example of a team that's maybe not built like that up front. They certainly are on their back end, but they would have gotten to that team identity, that playing that one style. So I know I just beat that to death, but I think if you sat and wrote your question down and looked at it, you would, that was more of a shotgun question. You're on page 890 now, and call me when you're done.
We'll go back to Scott Billick for a follow-up.
I'll try to keep the shotgun spray a little tighter than here. What would you say to the people then that think that, kind of Connor Hellebuck is the reason why you are where you are? And if he wasn't there, and this is kind of on Mike's kind of question, maybe a little piggybacking off of it, but, there's a group of people out there that would suggest that if you didn't have Connor Hellebuck, you guys wouldn't be a playoff team for the last couple of years. And
What do
perhaps
we
that's
do?
true, but sorry.
What do we do with that money then?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I'm just, I miss you. The cameras move around and yeah. I guess I'm curious to know just.
Are you just suggesting we don't trade him? Because he's on our team now. So
Yeah.
we're not sitting here, let's take the summer off because we got Connor Hellebuck. And in all of these great goaltenders, go back, like look at the Pittsburgh's 2 Stanley Cups, right? And you say, yeah, well, they had these amazing teams. They had Crosby, they had Malkin. Look at the games. Their goaltending, and it was 2 of them, absolutely stood on their heads, right? That's the key piece. They've all got great, great goaltending. We, in the last 2 years, have been thin on our blue line. That's just a fact. And 2 years prior to that, when we finished, I think, 5th in goals against, we were heavily loaded on our back end, and we had Connor Hellebuck, and we finished 5th in goals against, and we had a whole bunch of kids up front. Now it's starting to shift over. Our kids are getting a little older. Part of the cost is that is we lost a bunch of our back end, but we still have Connor Hellebuck. So when those 2 things come together and we still have Connor Hellebuck, then we will be a team that's going to be competing maybe in the final 8 like we were this year. We're a pretty good team. We've got some places that we got to get better at. Making the playoffs, winning the first round cannot possibly be viewed as a negative in Winnipeg, because then your standard's so skewed, you are never coming to the rink happy. Connor Hellebuck's on our team. We drafted him. Whoever drafted him, well done. We developed him, and he does mask a lot of the challenges that we've had, especially in the last 2 years, for sure. And we're going to try to address that and fix it and move forward in how we play. Our forward group is maturing into a really good forward group. Our back end has to catch up to kind of our goaltending, but not everybody has all the pieces all the time. So we're in that process of building that.
We'll go next to Ted Wyman from the Sun. Go ahead, Ted.
Thanks, Gregor. Morning, Paul. What's the message to young guys like Ville Heinola, Bestline, and Harkins, who didn't get to play as much as obviously they would have liked, spent a lot of time on the taxi squad? Like, is it a lot different than it would be in a regular year because it was so shortened?
Well, shortened, and we had to have certain players here. Like, we had to have a taxi squad. You weren't not allowed. And on your taxi squad at certain points in time, and because we didn't have a road game in our province, we couldn't bring people in and out. So our taxi squad had to be a little different than other teams. We had to keep some good young players there at every time, so that if we lost players, we could actually have enough players in the lineup. So we had a different dynamic with that. The message to the year-end message to Christian Vesalainen was like absolutely fantastic. The change in him, his body, his work ethic, his play from 1 year shocked me, and he earns all of it, right? Like, he came back a completely different young man. Hark, Hark came in and had a good year last year, and he's going to have to fight for a job next year. That's his lot in life right now but he's not taken this year Matty Perreault's job, because Matty Perreault's working net front on a power play that was running 3rd and 4th in the National Hockey League. Like, I'm not taking that guy out. The other 2 guys are killing penalties, and Harks hasn't gotten to that point yet. Ville Heinola probably has a better sense in some ways of where he's at than anybody else, because he went back home last year to play in Liga instead of playing in the American League, because he needed the time to do that, to let his body grow into it. He's got good, young, small defensemen, and he doesn't have to get bigger. I don't think he has to get a whole lot smarter. He just has to get faster. And then he's got to come in and earn a job on the left side, which is the challenge here right now when you've got Stanley and Sandberg and Heinola, and you've got Maurice. So we're stacked there. Ville on his offside would have been a really, really big disservice to him, right? It would have been a real challenge for him, especially first few games of the National Hockey League. So he's just got to, he's going to get faster. I don't really need him to get a whole, he's got to get stronger and all that. I'm not telling him to get bigger so he can hit. He's not going to play a physical game. He's going to play a speed game and a puck movement game. But he's like all good, young, small defensemen. He's going to take a little bit of time before he's pulling it across on the power play and everybody says how great he is. But he's a good player. Like, those guys are good players. They're not the tipping point right now for the Winnipeg Jets. That's all.
We'll go next to Murat Atesh from The Athletic. Go ahead, Murat.
Thanks, Gregor. Hi, Paul. I sort of
Did you want to, hey, Murat, did you want a longer answer than my last one on this? And I apologize for you with that, but you got me at the end of the meeting. You came in and out, and I had just had it. So I promise you a longer answer than just sure. And I apologize for it, but coaches get grumpy sometimes.
You know, it's funny. I was going to start by apologizing for the timing, suggesting that maybe today was a better day for that type of question anyhow.
That question was only slightly longer than Scott's, I think. What's that book, Memory of Things Past, Times Past? What's that? It's about 32,000 pages or something.
Thanks, Paul.
Maybe Jean-Paul Sartre book. I can't remember that. I think your question in Montreal was more akin to that book than War and Peace. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I'll aim for more concision. I go back to that taxi squad concept, and I mean, you mentioned the geography trouble of having teams in different places and the rules like that. I guess that threw some wrenches into things. I just remember at the beginning of the season, the message was that, you know, people aren't going to spend an exceptional amount of time there. Yeah. Heinola gets into a month or more where he doesn't play a game. And then some of the guys that do play, and this doesn't pertain as much to Heinola, you know, your fourth line is 2/3 guys who are UFAs right now. So if they're going to make a mistake in a big moment, their lesson doesn't help next year's Winnipeg Jets kind of thing. And that's the concept I'm going for. What would you say to that balance of when to play whom and get those lessons from those? This is a long question, but to get those lessons from the young players to actually help you in the future years.
Okay. So I want to separate like the two, Billy on the blue line, and the question more of Thompson, Lewis ahead of, I'm gathering, Harkins and Vesalainen. Is that where we are with that overtime? You've muted yourself now. Now we're on to something.
That was Gregor. He doesn't like my mutterings.
Oh no, you're good. Is that kind of part of the question?
Exactly right. Yeah, absolutely. You might throw Gustafson's name into that mix, but the exact right concept. That's what I meant.
I've got all three of those guys have a ways to go before I'm putting either of them to kill penalties against the Edmonton Oilers power play, which was number 1 in the league, or taking Matty Perreault's job on the power play. They're not even close to that. One or two of them may get a chance to do that over time. I do think, you know, Vesalainen may have shown us that he could actually, at some point, come into our lineup in a 3-hole with Lowry. That's a possibility because of his acumen on the ice. But none of those young players are close in terms of effectiveness in the game than those 3 veteran players. Not even close. And they might get there, and that's what the American League is going to do. And we might be able to say, okay, we've got the 2 right guys that we're going to bring in to play with one of these young guys, and they'll take off, or they'll get a little better and you'll put 2 younger guys in. But our fourth line this year truly had a big impact on all of the things that I am positive about our group. I don't know that they're coming back. That'll all be up to, they're all UFAs. I get that. But having 3 kids on your fourth line playing 8 minutes a night makes no sense to me, unless you can take one of them and play them up in the top 6 at some point if somebody gets injured, if they're that point. They need to play and play big minutes.
We'll go back to Murat for a follow-up. Go ahead, Murat.
Thanks, Gregor. And then just speaking on the defensive front, I'm not sure what you have Stanley, you have Heinola, you have Sandberg, you got a lot of young guys, rookies coming up. How can you possibly integrate all of these guys at the same time, recognizing the high-end skill sets that some of them have?
Excellent question. And that's a challenge, but not a negative one. So we have this long list of first-round players that come in and play and end up being developed. Maybe they don't come in at the same time, but they come in and they play. And I think all of these guys will. But you're right. I can't put 3 left-handed defensemen in their best position to succeed at the same time. So what we have is a pool now of good players, and shaping that group, you know, it's just as important for us to find the right player for Villy to play. But there's other players too that we have to, like, priority 1 might be making sure that we have the right guy for Josh Morris to play with to maximize what he can do, and Neil Pionk and what he can do. Because we're, again, in the final 8, and there's lots of questions of how could that have possibly happened when if we had just played our game, we should have won 2 Stanley Cups this year. That's the sense I'm getting. So you can't usually do 2 at the exact same time. I'm not sure that you see that where you play all your kids and win. So we develop them here very, very well, and we'll bring them in, and we've got to find the right mix to maximize their skill set. We do fortunately have 3 really good left-handed defensemen who none of were in our lineup at the start of the year, and they will eventually work their way in.
Go next to Dan Ralph from the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Dan.
Good morning, Paul. Thank you as always for your time. I'm wondering what sort of challenges this year presented to you as a head coach, given the fact that you had COVID to deal with, no fans in the stands. How did your guys sort of have to motivate themselves day in and day out?
Oh man, I'm going to have a better handle on this as I look back on the year, but I would say at the end of the day, it was extremes. Like we have a lot of players because of laws and rules and moving around that were gone away from their families for an extended period of time. And that's a challenge for any of us, right? And then they're not having fans in the buildings, I think really affected the emotional level. Like it's a hard thing to do. But you know what? I think I'd rather do it the other way. There were some great things about COVID. No, please don't forget that. There were some great reactions to the struggles in the pandemic. And one of it is, I think we spent more time together. The players themselves spent more time together. That was a real positive. And I think that's part of them coming together as a close-knit group. But I think maybe COVID sometimes makes you ask the question, well, why? Why do you do all this, right? We're trying to beat each other to death in a rink with no fans in it, and if you lose, you get beat to death by the media, and if you win, you move on to the next beating. It was there was a bit of a why. It was playing the game's fun, and on a backdoor rink, it's just as much fun for sure, right? But the fans just matter. They are such a huge part of the connection, of the enjoyment, of the emotional level. And that's the big takeaway by far after this horrible rambling that I've just given you, is that the game's no fun without fans. It's no fun at all.
And final question to Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet. Go ahead, Sean.
Hey, Paul, you going back to one of your answers earlier on, you were talking about the D needing to kind of catch up with where Connor Hellebuck is. I don't know, I'm guessing I can't ask a follow-up question, so I'm going to try and smush 2 together. So
ask 2. Just throw it right in Gregor's face, man.
Okay, well, let's start with the first one. How confident are you that the D will be able to catch up to Connor Hellebuck in this next upcoming year?
Was that 2 questions?
Okay, here the other question is basic. I'm wondering, you were talking about not having those Norris type D men. You referenced that earlier. Okay. What's your thought on the potential, or would you be okay, or do you think your core is strong enough to lose a core piece in the pursuit of trying to pick up a Norris style defenseman like that?
So I would say, Sean, that I didn't say that that they're going to catch up to Connor Hellebuck, because we don't, I mean, that's not what I'm asking for. I'm just telling you that we've had this big shift kind of over the last few years from heavy back end to real young and almost light front end. And now we've shifted and needed to do because of contracts and then certainly retirements and all those other things that went on. We kind of got swung over to the other side. So we had this group of defensemen like last year, and yes, Connor Hellebuck's a big part of it, but this group of defensemen that finished 10th in goals against last year scratched and clawed this year and shut down the 1-2. There are a lot of really good individual men. Matter of fact, any one of those guys as an individual, we would love to keep and have, because they're that good as people. How this fits, right? So if you're fully considering Ville Heinola, then there needs to be a player on the other side of the ice that makes that work and gives us a chance to win. And those are all the questions that we're in a good place to answer now, because we do have some young pieces back there to try to make those decisions on. It will, I think, improve to be honest with you, fellas, I thought our back end was better this year than it was last year in terms of quality of player. I think we did. I mean, Forbert came in, God bless him, blocked everything that came to the net. Had a really good, wonderful pairing with Neil Pionk, and ran against Draisaitl when they were split and second unit off the bench. And those guys stayed on the ice for 2 minutes a shift, so they played as much against him as Morrissey and DeMello did. So we're looking for that improvement on our back end for sure. But we all know that this isn't sneaking up on us. And we know our goaltender can stop a whole lot of pucks. We got to give him a chance to be the difference in the game. We did that in the Edmonton series. We gave him a chance to be the difference, and he was. We didn't get to that in the Montreal series, and I think that's the place that we can make our biggest improvement.
Thanks very much, Paul.
So, hey, Gregor, listen, if there's anything else, anybody else got a question? I got one last thing I'll get off my chest, because I normally don't follow this, but it's about respect in the NHL. One of the staff with the Jets made a comment that people were very upset that I didn't shake hands with the Montreal Canadiens at the end of the game. And I want to be clear about that, because I spent a long time in this league and I've always been exceptionally respectful of players. If you go back to when I started early on, the coaches never shook the players' hands. And I think that's right. I think just the men who swing at each other and fight and scratch and claw, I think that's the player's place, right? So I think I did it like I didn't for the first 12 years. I think I did it in the Nashville series. And I remember thinking, I'm never doing that again. That's just weird, right? These players are looking at me like, what are you doing out here in your suit, shaking my hand in the middle of the ice? And I'm thinking, what am I doing shaking their hands? So, and then when you add the COVID thing where we're supposed to stay 6 feet away from everybody else, the Montreal Canadiens deserve the right to go on. I never crossed my mind, but it certainly was not a disrespect for those players and what they did. Eric Stahl's one of my favorite players who ever coached. I would have loved to congratulate him after the game, but we just spent 1.5 years with masks on, staying 6 feet away from people. If I was going to shake somebody's hands, it wouldn't have been this year. But I wanted that cleared up, because that bothered me a little bit. I didn't, if I disrespected any of the Montreal Canadian players by not shaking their hands, my apology.
Thanks very much, Paul.
Okay, guys.